I would now like to introduce today's guest speaker. Arlene Gaines is the Director of Hospice Social Services at Jewish Social Service Agency, JSSA Hospice, where she leads the social work, chaplaincy, volunteer, and bereavement teams. She's an award-winning author of the I Have a Question children's book series, which includes I Have a Question About Death. She is pursuing her PhD in palliative care at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. I will now hand it over to you, Arlene.
Thank you so much, Tony, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so glad to be here with all of you today. I can't see your faces, but I know you're there. So sending greetings during this time. We are going to be talking about holiday cheer, holiday fears, a topic that holds a lot of weight during this time. We had this big rain yesterday for those of you who are local, and this morning I woke up and it was really kind of chilly out. And I just had this feeling that, yeah, we are getting close to this holiday season now. So it was really just sort of apropos as we're thinking about talking about this topic together and coping with grief during the holidays. Grief feels especially tender during the holidays, and each of our hearts will need different things from us as we process and navigate the difficult terrain of loss. So, as we talk about this topic today, which I hope will have some very concrete strategies, as I know when I attend a webinar, I'm always so glad to come away with something really concrete. I just want to acknowledge that the subject of grief, the subject of loss, and the subject of the holidays all do hold a lot of weight and can bring up a lot of feelings. So I just want to start by acknowledging that. So those of you who are here and listening, to just be mindful of any feelings that are brought up for you as we go through this topic, and to just honor and acknowledge those. In our brief time together, we're going to go over a few things. We're just going to touch on grief in general and grief responses to just really kind of have our thinking about holidays really situated within our good understanding of grief. And then we're going to talk about the holidays and ways that we might cope, knowing that we don't have all the answers. And then we're going to leave some time for Q&A. I'll be wrapping up hopefully by about 1:45, and we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A. If during this presentation you think of questions or have little comments, feel free to pop it in the question and answer box if you'd like, and we will address those at the end. So first, let's talk about grief. What is the grieving process really, really like? Well, I've had the opportunity to work in the field of hospice care close to 20 years now. And the one thing I have sort of learned about grief is that as soon as we think we know what it is, it just keeps changing, it keeps growing, it keeps evolving. Sometimes we have this feeling that it might be a nice, neat little ball, and we're going to work through this process and we're done. But in reality, a lot of people find it's a really messy mess of string, as you can see in this picture here. Sometimes we think that grief might have to be carried out in certain stages. And we hear this a lot in pop culture. You might hear about the stages of grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talked about stages of grief, and we really credit her for getting us talking about death and dying. But these stages were really designed for people who are dying themselves. And we have moved on from linear stages of grief. We understand now that grief is really more messy. There's a lot of back and forth. There are a lot of different things that happen during that process. And certain times, like the holidays, might really trigger certain feelings. We have moved away from grief as being an endpoint and severing the relationship. There were times long ago that we used to think that someone died, and that means that we move on, that we must sort of end that relationship and that connection, and we move on. Of course, we know that is absolutely not the case, and that we really stay connected in an ongoing, evolving way with the person who died. I don't know if you can see on your screen, I'm wearing what I call my Continuing Bonds necklace. You can see I have a little A right here on my necklace. And in grief, we talk about this idea of continuing bonds, that we really keep a connection to someone who died. This necklace reminds me of someone in my life who also started with an A. And she loved that we both had an A in common and we were the A team. And so when I wear this necklace, I think of this person and I really feel connected to her. So I put that on for you all today, as I knew we were going to be talking about grief. So, what is grief? We know this is a very natural response to loss. Many of you who are here today may be grieving someone or maybe many people in your lives. It's a very, very natural and expected response to loss. And there's a whole spectrum of what grief can look like. There's absolutely no right or wrong. And as I share, the more I have been in this field, the more I have understood that there is no right or wrong and that it can change. People often have a range of emotions, and it can come in waves at different times of year and in different ways. Some people might feel a sadness, a real sadness, a real sense of yearning, a real sense of at night, I look over at the bed next to me and this person I've loved and I have slept next to for all these years is not there. I am really yearning for this person. You feel it deep in your bones. There are some people who may share, I don't really feel anything. I just can't cry. Is there something wrong with me? A sort of numbness. Sometimes people might describe feeling just kind of irritable or frustrated for no reason at all. I'm just on edge. And some people might feel all of these things all put together. Sometimes there's a sense of relief in grief. And sometimes people feel guilty about feeling a sense of relief. Perhaps some of you, even on this webinar today, have cared for someone you have loved with dementia. And it has been a very long, drawn out process. And this person has perhaps lost their quality of life, and it's been a long, many difficult years. And sometimes when that death occurs, there's a real sense of relief. And not that we would ever want someone's death to happen, but a relief that they are at peace, a relief for lots of different reasons. That is a very normal response. Sometimes people might feel angry at this situation, at the person. I can't believe they have left me. They have left me with this mess of paperwork I am having to deal with. And guilt. We hear a lot about guilt in our work. I really wished I had done this. I really wish we had done this or talked about this. And fatigue, all kinds of body sensations. We're on a webinar format in which we don't have the interactive chat box, but what I want you to do is take a moment to reflect whether it's a loss that you have experienced yourself, or maybe if you haven't experienced a loss, maybe what you think it might be like, or maybe people you know have experienced a loss. Think about what that has been like for you or for them. You can write it in the Q&A box, or you can think to yourself. Just reflect on the scope and the range of what grief can feel like, because it is really vast. When we think about grief, there are lots and lots of ways to describe it. And people have written many books, there are many articles, and lots of ways that we have tried to make sense of this experience. And we are leading toward the holidays in just a moment, but it really does help to think about this nature of grief. One of the models that often resonates the most for people we work with, we do different support groups at Jessa, and we work with a lot of bereaved individuals who perhaps have, we've cared for them through Jessa Hospice. We will sometimes share this model. It's by a woman, her name was Lois Tonkin, and it's about grief and change, growing around grief. So as you can see in this little picture, sometimes people tend to believe that grief shrinks over time, that it will get smaller and smaller as time goes on. But what we know, what really happens, is that we grow around our grief. That loss is there. And as you can see with the bigger bottles, it shows our lives as we are adapting to this loss, incorporating this loss in our life, and really figuring out how am I going to navigate this new normal? How am I going to figure this out when I'm thinking about the holidays coming? So I wanted to share this one model with you because people have often found it really helpful, and it's something to think about as we get into the context of holidays. Along with the concept of change is what I like to call your coping landscape. So just as your grief process may ebb and flow and have different permutations over time, the way that you cope with your loss will continue to also change over time as you make sense of your new reality. And this landscape very often ebbs and flows in different parts and different times of year. So as you start thinking about moving toward the holidays, it might be a time of heightened emotions. And your coping landscape may be a little more challenged as you see this coming. So I encourage you to think about your coping as having ebbs and flows and recognizing in the moment if it's feeling harder that I might be in a more challenging time in my landscape. I really feel this mountain in front of me right now. It will have its ebbs, it will have its flows, but that this is a natural part of the grief experience. As we think about these ebbs and flows and we think about the changes that we are adapting to as we are getting accustomed to this loss in our life over time, holidays really, really come to the forefront. It is truly a time of great tradition, very often, and a time of change. It can really evoke many, many feelings. And in our work with bereaved individuals, we often will be in touch with individuals for the 13 months after a loss. When we are having our phone calls, holidays are very, very, very often a subject that are brought up. So if any of you are on this call and you're really starting to think about holidays, I want you to know you're not alone. This is very normal to be really starting to think about it and maybe even feeling some anxiety as the holidays are approaching. So, holidays, they evoke strong feelings. They may even evoke strong feelings aside from a loss. I was talking with some folks in our office, and we were just talking about the nature of holidays in general and all the anticipation and what it's about. It's often a season associated with family gatherings. Not always, but often. And there are often very, very strong connotations to how we have celebrated the holidays for many, many years, perhaps. It might bring up poignant memories of how life was before the loss. It really can highlight this loss. And it can be particularly a challenging time for those who are grieving. We know that traditional ways of marking the holidays might need to change now for lots of different reasons. Perhaps holidays were associated with a family dinner, and the people in that family are no longer present in our lives. Perhaps holidays involved really being mobile and being at our church or being at our synagogue or being out and about in some way. And perhaps the loss of mobility and changes over time will hinder being able to do those things. Perhaps there's a lot of food that has been involved in the holidays, and really being able to cook in the same way really may not be possible. The holidays are very often associated with the concept of home. It may not be a physical home, it might be, but often the concept of home and what that means to you. And your home may be missing someone. So one of the first things we do when we think about how are we going to cope with these holidays? How are we going to manage this time? One of the things that I often share is that it helps to start with a stance of open reflection, to really come at it kind of with a reflective attitude, thinking about, okay, I know these holidays are coming. What have they meant to me? So perhaps even right now, if you're comfortable, or maybe another time, you can think about a holiday that's been important in your life. And I can also add that this also can work for other important milestones, perhaps an anniversary, perhaps a birthday, perhaps another celebration that was felt by all throughout the year, but we're sort of have it in the context of holidays now. So think about a holiday that's been important. What meaning has it had? What has it meant to you? What has it been like for your family? How has it shaped you as a person? How has it shaped you as a family together? Family in the broader sense too, including friends, communities, spiritual, religious communities. What meaning does it have for you? And as we put that together, we can recognize that our reactions, our emotions, our feelings are really impacted by that meaning that we attach to the holiday or event. I can think about some holidays in my own life that don't have a lot of meaning at all. Holidays that are maybe celebrated in the calendar year, for me, have not had so much meaning. But other holidays in my life have great meaning. And so we think about, the rhythm of the year and what has meaning for you. So really keep that in mind as we are thinking about that. So given the meaning that we attach to holidays, how do we cope with this grief that we know that we may be really experiencing during the holidays? So, a couple things. First and foremost, setting expectations. This is really where it begins. I was actually talking with someone else in our office today about this, about setting expectations and really reflecting on our or your emotional capacity during this time. It is okay to give ourselves grace, to know that it may not be so joyful like it used to be. It may not be so enjoyable, but there may be a both and. There may be aspects that may be enjoyable and joyous, and you may be feeling your loss. And so to really set that expectation, kind of the both and, that you may be really experiencing this loss during the season, and that is okay and expected. It is okay as you reflect on your emotional capacity to decline an invitation or to simplify your plans. It is okay to listen to yourself and what you need. And as you listen to your body and yourself and your heart and your mind, to really share those needs with others. Let people know where you're at. Really communicate your boundaries. This year, as I'm grieving this loss, I feel I will be unable to participate in this, but I'll be able to join you for this part of it. I might come by for the dessert. The full evening and day will be too much for me this year, but I would love to come by at the end and be with you all together at that time. Planning ahead really makes a difference here. Yet being prepared to be flexible if plans don't go according to what you had thought. So this is the first kind of strategy that we have for coping with a loss, to really set your expectations, reflect on where you're at this year, which might be different next year, and to plan ahead for that, to really think ahead and to be flexible if things don't go exactly as planned. One of the things that we can do as we plan ahead is to think about the holidays in terms of the rituals that make up the holidays. Things that are old, things that we have become accustomed to, and things that might be new. So when we're first thinking about the old, again, turning to self-reflection, thinking about what has been important to me in the holidays and what aspects of those holidays can or need to continue. For some families, there is, for instance, a certain recipe that is the centerpiece and a tradition of the holiday season. And that's really, really important to me that I find a way to make that recipe. Or maybe it's not about the food. Maybe what's been important to me is just being together. And that togetherness is what I really want to honor, even if other parts of it may change. So those of you who are here and listening, think about holidays, some of the holidays you have experienced, and you may not be able to do that this moment, but really start to consider what aspect has been important to me. Perhaps one of the aspects has been being with that person who has died. That will be something that is a real loss and that it is a really okay to acknowledge. What old traditions am I mourning? I am really mourning that I am not able to be with this person in the same way. And then starting to think about what are some of the new traditions that I might be able to embrace, knowing that holidays will not be exactly the same. It will not be possible that it will be exactly the same after someone in your life who's been important to you has died. Knowing that that is going to involve some change, are there some new traditions I want to embrace? And I have a bunch of examples coming up soon, and we'll see if we have some examples we might want to share at the end. But you might want to think about what is something I have wanted to try. I was talking with a bereaved individual pretty recently, and she said, the holidays, I have loved the holidays all my life, but they were really exhausting. They took a lot out of me. I have always wanted to go on a cruise during the holiday season, and that is what I am doing this year. I am getting out of town and I'm traveling. So sometimes people really, really want to try something very new, and sometimes they might want to just incorporate some new aspects of new things within older rituals. How will I incorporate the memory of my person I'm thinking of in new ways? Something to think about. What might bring me comfort during this time? So, as we're thinking about the possibility of weaving in some maybe new rituals with old rituals, one of the things that can be helpful is to remember the person. It can be easy sometimes to just sort of not want to talk about them the whole holiday, kind of just move on a little bit and really not acknowledge it. But one thing that can be really helpful is actually saying it, giving it a name, giving it a voice, and saying, perhaps at a dinner or wherever it might be, we're here together. I am really thinking of my husband, whatever his name may be. I'm thinking of him. I'm missing him right now. And I'm so glad as a family we can be together. But really naming it, really, really saying the person's name and naming that feeling of missing them. Again, creating a ritual really purposeful about how we're going to honor and remember this person during the holiday season. And one of the ways that we can honor and remember is by sharing stories. Sharing stories really, really can bring much comfort. It can bring sometimes some tears. It can bring definitely some laughing. But it is a way to help with that ongoing connection, with those continuing bonds that I had mentioned. Sometimes people are worried that if we honor and remember this person, that it might make everyone sad. But we know that people may be feeling sad already, and it may be even more sad to even not say their name or acknowledge the person's memory. Charles Core, who does a lot of writing related to end-of-life experiences, says, the nature of the new ritual is not as significant as the fact that it serves your needs at this difficult time. What is most significant about any old or new ritual is that it should affirm the life and legacy of your loved one, express the joy and happiness you were privileged to share together, and bring some measure of consolation to you in your bereavement. In other words, not to put pressure on yourself that you have to create the perfect new ritual, that you have to have this perfectly figured out, but that there's just a sense of understanding that we are going to be blending old and new traditions together. We're going to do the best we can as we remember and honor the person who's died and also celebrate being together in the best way we can. One of our bereavement counselors here at Jessa Hospice she contributed to the next several slides, which I'll share with you, that are based on, it's really a compilation of examples of how families have blended old and new traditions. So these are some examples that we have heard from families. Everything is de-identified, so you won't, of course, see anyone's name, but it might give you some examples of some concrete ways that we can blend different old and new traditions. So here's an example. We start with a moment of silence, or someone offers a toast or a prayer, if appropriate, at the start of our family dinner. This person says, "My wife loved flowers." So we place a single rose on the table in her memory. So this would be another example of a continuing bond, something that really helps us feel connected to the person. So sometimes having an object or something that's very tangible that we can look at or hold really helps bring that person, the memory of that person and their life and their legacy into our space during the holidays. This person says, "We put a special ornament on the tree that symbolizes my husband's favorite hobby." So really, again, thinking about this person who has died and what their life was about, what they loved, and can we blend that with our new traditions? This is a family who celebrates Hanukkah. They say, "In memory of our child who has died, we dedicate the shamash," that's this the candle in the middle, "from which the other candles are lit, on our family's menorah." Many families find comfort in using candles and light and things like that to remember the person. Sometimes they'll have a candle lit during the holidays. This person said, "We write notes to mom and put them in her Christmas stocking and then read them aloud during dinner." So different rituals people have tried. Here is another one. This person says when they are with their family, they'll ask, "What leaps to your mind when I mention Uncle Bill?" That's not his real name. We go around the table, starting with the children. It's a spontaneous stream of stories that bring enjoyment, laughter, and yearning and different feelings. So here is an example of being together around a table, sharing memories, really talking about this person who has died. This person says, "The chair where my husband always sat is given to any of the grandchildren to designate the continuity of generations." One of the things that we hear very often from families, especially where a holiday has involved a dinner, is the feeling of the empty chair is one of the hardest parts of the holiday time. And so to, again, really plan ahead, think about that. And this is a family that used that chair for children and to really, again, think about that continuity of generations. Here is a family who said our 16-year-old son slash grandson wrote a poem and read it in his grandmother's memory. Sometimes people will play music, things like that. And lastly, the last example is we got together and cooked my wife's signature meal. It helps continue her tradition. So we know holidays are very often associated with food. Many rituals are related to food. So sometimes people think of options related to that. I was talking with someone recently and I kind of went the other way where they said holidays have always been associated with food. I can't keep that up. That is too hard for me. I cannot make the homemade cranberry sauce for Thanksgiving. I will be buying it from a can, and I am okay with that. So again, giving ourselves grace to not have to do things perfectly, to set expectations about what is really realistic or not, Um, and I think that's a great example of kind of the other way of looking at it around this meal was something we used to have together. We're going to try a new tradition. We're going to be having we're going to be, having Thai food today because it is just too much to try to cook a whole meal. And that is okay too. So, one of the things you can think about, and at the end, if we have time and you'd like to share, start thinking about what are some new rituals you might be thinking of, or maybe you have tried, and maybe that worked, or maybe that didn't work, and that's okay too. So start to think about that. If there are any that you're thinking of and you want to write in the question and answer chat while you're waiting toward the end, you can certainly do that. But just something food for thought that you can start to think about that. So we've talked about setting expectations and especially planning ahead, really thinking about rituals, old and new. But there's another side to this experience too, and that really has to do with self-care. Really, really caring for yourself during this time the best you can. Does not have to be perfect, the best you can. So, one of the things that we often talk with bereaved families about is really, again, being gentle on yourself. So gentle on yourself. This does not need to be a perfect time of year. It is okay if some of it goes well and some of it does not go well. That is okay. It is really okay. Validating your emotions. What you are feeling is okay. That is what you are feeling. And just honoring and noticing that that is what you're feeling during this time. Finding outlets. So that is very individual. So for me, I love to be outside. I love looking at the birds. I love going on a walk. When I am feeling strong or big feelings in my life, I find that I do really well going outside, being in nature. So think to yourself, what brings me comfort? For some people, it might be going on a walk, exercise. Sometimes it might be journaling. It might be reading. It might be watching a silly show on TV and just taking a break from the stress. That is okay too. So thinking about your outlets, what brings you comfort? Because we really may want to bolster some of those outlets during this time. So as you can see, so much of coping with the holidays really comes back to self-reflection. It really, really does help. So as we think about being gentle on ourselves, we really want to think of that in terms of our physical health, our emotional health, our spiritual health. So of course, our body tells us a lot. We often hold a lot of the stress, grief we are feeling in our bodies. Perhaps some of you have felt that feeling after you've experienced a loss. Maybe you have a headache, or you're tired, or you sort of have sort of weird butterfly feelings in your stomach, or you have a stomach ache. You might feel more fatigued. This is our body giving us a message, telling us that, hey, you know what? You really might be experiencing some grief right now, and your body is giving you that message. Of course, we may feel it in our mind, and we've talked a lot about many of the grief responses in the earlier part of this program. And there may be many, many different ways that you feel this. You may feel increased anxiety. You may feel a sense of anticipation. Oh my gosh, these holidays are coming, sort of a sense of dread. You may feel at peace. You may be doing okay. And it may be also impacting your spirit. Sometimes the holiday season and grief in general can bring up bigger existential questions for us. It brings up a lot of questions related to our feelings, our connection to whatever that might be, if it's God or a higher power, whatever brings a connection for people if they have a faith tradition or background. So really thinking about these three aspects, and in these three parts of the pie, what bring comfort? So again, thinking about your body, thinking about what brings comfort to my body when I am feeling kind of tense. So as I shared for me, I like to be out in nature. That really helps me feel more relaxed. So think about when your body is not feeling so good, what is it needing? When your mind is not feeling so great, what brings comfort? So some people, it might be meditation, it might be listening to some relaxing music. So really, really thinking thoughtfully and purposefully about what brings me comfort in my mind. Thinking about your spirit. Again, what brings you comfort spiritually? For some people, it may be in more organized faith tradition. It might be being part of a synagogue or church community. It may be something that you experience more on your own or with or without community. So really thinking through in all these dimensions. And finally, we really want to think about the ways that we can seek support. So we talked a lot about caring for ourselves, and that has to do a lot with our self process about what we're doing for ourselves. But it can also be helpful to really look externally, thinking about who is in your support system. And there are times in our life in which that support system is not feeling so strong, especially if friends have died and the people who used to be part of your support system are no longer here or with us. So this can sometimes be a challenging part of this experience to think about who's in my support system when perhaps my support system has been shrinking a little bit. So we want to think about it in terms of family, and that might be family in the sense of family members, but that might be very people who are in your family system. It might be extended family, it might be close friends. Thinking about can we be reaching out to them a little bit more during this time? Can we share with them the holidays are coming up? We're coming up to Thanksgiving, or we're coming up to Christmas or Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, and to share with family or friends. Just want you to know where I'm at. This is coming up and I'm really feeling it. I'm really maybe leaning on you a little more during this time. Some people may have a spiritual support system, so it can also be quite helpful to think about that. And often it can be helpful, especially if there's a limited support system through family and friends, or if the feelings of grief are really, really impacting your ability to kind of carry out day-to-day activities. It can be quite helpful to work with a therapist or a counselor. It's very common to work with someone to get some extra help. And it can be, especially when we'll talk with people who are bereaved and they'll say, there's only so much I can tell my friends about this over and over again. When you're working with a therapist or a counselor, that is a safe person just for you to be able to share your experience. So that is something to consider. And then there are support groups. We have some at Jessa and there's some throughout the community. I'm quite sure Tony may be able to help me at the end, but I think Suburban also has a number of wonderful groups. So there are lots and lots of groups in the community. So that might be something to think about. And those of you who are here and attending today, perhaps attending a webinar on this topic is a way of seeking support. So thank you again for being here, because this is a way that perhaps you might be seeking some support. So good for you for being here. So as I wrap up and we'll get ready to move to our Q&A in just a moment, we want to again come back to just this idea that we are remembering them. We are always remembering them, but we are particularly remembering them, the people in our lives who have died during this holiday season. David Kessler writes, what everyone has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share a need for their grief to be witnessed. We are witnesses to each other's grief. So continuing to think about, again, your support system, witnessing your own grief, really honoring and acknowledging that during that time. Just briefly who we are, if you have any questions, we're getting ready to move to the Q&A. I work with Jessa Hospice, which is part of a larger agency. Jessa, we are health and social wellness agency. We have lots and lots of wonderful services at Jessa. So if you ever have any questions about any of our services, you're always welcome to call. Um, and you can see some of these services on your screen here. So we're going to move to our Q&A. Looks like we have some questions. I don't know, Tony, if you'd like to go through
Yes,
those. I also have them on my screen.
sure, I got it. So our first question is, I plan to include some tips and observations that my spouse said over years. Your priority is not anyone's priorities. Don't go up or down the stairs empty-handed. You get more with honey than vinegar.
I love that. I love that so much. I really appreciate the participant who shared that and how you also wrote about comfort and humor. I was actually just listening to a podcast on my way to work today, just about that very, very topic about the place for humor within coping. And I really should have an extra slide on that. So I think this is a great reminder for that, that it is also okay to laugh. It is okay to feel good. And to really reflect. And those are beautiful gems you shared. So thank you so much for those beautiful words of wisdom. They definitely brought a smile to my face. Let's see.
So I'm sorry. So we're
Oh,
open
I was going to
to
say, I know we had
additional
one,
questions, right?
yeah, I know we had one question given to us in advance, I think. Should we address that one, Tony?
Correct. Yes. Let me pull
Okay.
it up.
Okay.
I don't have it ready. Let me pull it up real quick.
Okay. Or I'm happy to summarize it. And feel free to keep the questions coming. Just open your question and answer box and you can put it right in there. If there's anything that you would like to ask me off a webinar format, you can see my contact information is on the screen and you are welcome to reach out. Some questions might be more specific to a certain situation, so you're welcome to reach out to me. Are there going to be notes sent out? Yes, yes. I'll let Tony speak to that. Yes.
Yes. So after the webinar concludes today, and I'll mention this again after we leave, but I'll actually send the presentation out via email of the entire webinar. I'm sorry, of the entire presentation. And then there also will be a link that'll be shared because this webinar is being recorded. I will send that link out in the coming days as well. And Arlen, if you're ready, I do have that advanced question that was sent earlier this week that I can go ahead and read.
Great. Yeah, feel free. I'm ready, Tony.
Okay. My question would probably be, how can we enjoy the moments when there is so much grief? Personally, I had more names than I would like for All Saints Sunday. A dear friend since 1976 who was in a care facility with post-polio syndrome and passed away of COVID on Thanksgiving. My first cousin who passed away on December 22nd. A cherished former pastor who passed away in January of cancer. My godson's dad who passed away very suddenly in August, less than a month before their 50th anniversary, and a wonderful friend and classmate who passed away September 27th of cancer, and the division in our country and the upheaval in the world.
Well, I really appreciate this question, and for our participant who asked it, certainly thinking of you during this time of so many losses. There is a kind of a fancy name for this. It's when it's called concurrent losses or cumulative losses. This is really a real thing. When you feel like you've had a loss and then you notice, I wait, I'm having another and another and another, and it really, really builds up. And it is indeed extremely, extremely difficult. So certainly thinking of you during this time. It's a great question. How am I going to enjoy the holidays given all of this loss, given feelings, heightened feelings you might be feeling just, we've gone through a heightened time in our country for whatever place you are, fall in that. And there's a lot going on. And I think the answer is, again, it comes back to giving yourself grace, being gentle on yourself, and allowing the holiday season to unfold in the way it's going to unfold. So knowing that there may be aspects that might be enjoyable, but there may be aspects that might be really poignant and really sad and really, really hard. And so again, it's not going to be necessarily an either or, that you're going to either enjoy it or it's going to be all terrible and miserable. we hope there may be some space in the middle where there may be both and, that you may be able to enjoy aspects of it, perhaps being with people in your life who mean a lot to you, and that may be of great comfort. And there may be aspects that will be really hard, and to just be so gentle on ourselves to allow that to happen. Again, thank you for that question.
Arlen, we have another question. How can you tell when it would be most helpful to seek individualized therapy versus a support group setting?
Thank you for this question. This is a wonderful question that we get asked a lot. Sort of when is it the right time to be in a support group versus therapy? So, from my experience, when there are this may be an example, I even the prior question, when there are a lot of losses, sometimes people will come to us with really challenging situations that my mother has died. I've also just retired. I've also just experienced the loss of my pet, and my other person has died. You know, when there's so much going on, which indeed does happen in times of our life, we have sometimes found that there may be too much in that moment that a support group can hold. So, if there are certainly significant mental health issues that someone is working through, if the loss is so intrusive that it is hard to get out of bed, if there might be some really, really challenging times in terms of being able to carry out day-to-day activities, a lot of loss going on, it's quite likely that individualized therapy and counseling might be a great place to start, because that therapist can really work with you and tailor your healing and your work through all of this grief to your situation. When you're in a grief support group, the thing you have to remember is that you will have a chance to share your story and receive support, but you also need to be able to give support to others and be in a place where you have that emotional space to give and receive support. And sometimes that takes some time to be able to do that. So, great question. And sometimes counseling is a really, really helpful place to start, just so the support group is not frustrating. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlen. And we have another question. When someone is grieving, their loved ones often ask them what they can do to help or support. Sometimes the bereaved doesn't know how to respond or what to ask for. What do you suggest?
Oh, another great question. Um, so it's so interesting. I just was reading a message for someone in my life I know who was experiencing the death of someone, and she was telling the people in her life, I would like you to stop asking, how are you doing? Because when you ask that to me, I don't know how to answer it. So if you're very brave and you're a bereaved person, it is okay to speak up and say, um, it's hard for me when I'm asked this, but when you come and just give me a hug and sit with me, I really, really like that. So, one of the things that bereaved individuals often say is someone will say, is there anything I can do? And that really puts the burden on the bereaved person to come up with that thing. So, something that could be really helpful is someone and the support system can come and say, you know, I would love to bring you a meal next week. Would that be okay? And the person might say yes or no, but sort of coming up with what that might be, because we certainly don't want to inadvertently put more of a burden on the bereaved person to have to come up with what you want them to do as just more on their to-do list. But great question. There's some wonderful articles around just sort of do's and don'ts, things that are hard to hear when you're grieving. And that would be another wonderful presentation. We could talk about that for an hour, really. Thank you, Jennifer, for that question.
Okay, do we have any additional questions from the audience? I'll pause and hopefully someone can uh, text or type in any questions that you may think of. But in the meantime, maybe some of the audience members are thinking or contemplating a question. Arlen, did you have any additional comments you'd like to make, or any information, or any resources, or just anything else you would like to share as we wait to see if there are additional questions?
Sure. No, I've really appreciated the opportunity to be here, the very, very thoughtful questions. I just want to again acknowledge that talking about this subject can bring up different feelings. So if you have been attending this webinar and you are in the midst of grieving someone you love and holidays are coming up, to again really honor, acknowledge those feelings, engage in some self-care, maybe take a little walk after this webinar. I certainly hope it's been helpful. If I can be helpful in any way, again, I'm at Jessa. You're always welcome to reach out if you have any questions. We do work with people in the community who have questions about grief and those kinds of things and can help steer you in different directions. So make use of your good community resources. I know Suburban has lots and lots of resources as well. But yeah, I think that's all I really have at this point. But I just, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Okay, great. All right, with that said, we are now going to end the Q&A period. So thank you, Arlen, for that very informative presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give a reminder to, once this webinar ends, you will get prompted for a program evaluation. So please complete those, as those are very helpful as we go forward to sponsoring additional webinars and planning and execution of our community health improvement programs. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's meeting. The Community Health and Wellness Department here at Suburban Hospital would like to again thank you all for attending, and Arlen for her presence here today. We hope the information she shared is beneficial to each and every one of you. Have a great rest of your afternoon.